Hidden deep within the fog-drenched hills of Yorkshire stands a manor few dare approach. Its twisted chimneys claw at the sky, its windows long shattered like the memories trapped inside, and its walls whisper with secrets centuries old. This is Ashford Manor, a relic of aristocracy, ambition, and something far more sinister. Once the crown jewel of the Ashford family, it now rots in decay, overtaken by ivy and folklore. But it wasn't always a ruin. Decades ago, it pulsed with life, echoing the ambitions of a man obsessed with legacy, a woman burdened by omens, and children born beneath blood moons. Before it became a local legend, it was a thriving household with secrets so dark they'd eventually tear reality apart. Travelers who dared near it at night claimed to hear lullabies echoing from empty halls. Children's laughter, long silenced, floated through broken glass. And more chillingly, the same dreams plagued those who stayed nearby. Visions of pale-faced children in white gowns, standing motionless in the orchard, eyes glowing faintly in the night. For decades, these were dismissed as ghost stories, the kind told to scare children and attract thrill-seekers. But when a series of old journals were discovered buried beneath the manor's cellar, a far darker truth began to surface. This isn't a tale of simple haunting. This is a generational descent into madness, of science twisted by ego, of ritual masked by tradition, and of a family line cursed by its own sins. The Ashfords were not merely wealthy, they were powerful, influential, and dangerously curious. And curiosity, as history shows, can sometimes invite the darkest of forces into one's home. This story isn't fiction. It's built upon recorded accounts, preserved letters, and diaries kept hidden for over a century. We've pieced together the puzzle from historical archives, eyewitness accounts, and what little remains of the manor itself. But be warned, what you're about to hear is not just unsettling, it's disturbingly real. As we peel back the layers of the Ashford legacy, we'll uncover how one family's desire to master life and death led to unimaginable horror. So sit back, turn the lights down, and prepare to travel back in time to when the Ashford family ruled over their land and began their descent into darkness. Because once you step through the gates of Ashford Manor, there's no turning back. Elias Ashford was not a man of moderation. Born in 1784 to modest parents in the industrial town of Sheffield, Elias clawed his way to prominence through ruthless business dealings, obscure scientific study, and a charm that masked something deeply unsettling. By the time he was 30, he had amassed enough wealth to purchase over 200 acres of secluded land in Yorkshire. It was there, far from the prying eyes of society, that Ashford Manor would rise, a sprawling estate built on both stone and silence. Locals quickly grew wary of Elias. Though polite in public, he rarely ventured beyond his estate walls. Servants were hired but seldom stayed longer than a season. One maid, dismissed in the dead of winter, later described Elias's study as a chamber of horrors, lined with books bound in strange leather and diagrams of human anatomy scribbled with symbols she could not understand. In hushed tones, villagers whispered that Elias was practicing medicine, though not the kind taught in universities. They said he sought to undo death itself. What made Elias particularly frightening was his fascination with preservation. While many in his era studied embalming for burials, Elias experimented with sustaining tissue, slowing decay, and halting the passage of time. His writings, later found in a sealed drawer, outlined early attempts at cryogenics and chemical stasis. But buried within these scientific musings were darker revelations. Elias believed the soul could be contained, even manipulated through ancient rituals borrowed from forgotten traditions in Eastern Europe. He was especially interested in twins. To Elias, twins represented duality, the split between spirit and flesh, mind and memory. It was no coincidence that his first children were identical girls, born during a thunderstorm in 1812. From the moment of their birth, Elias became obsessed. He claimed the lightning theo at night was divine electricity, a signal that the Ashfords were chosen for something greater. He began conducting experiments on animals first, mice, cats, even foxes, testing ways to make them return after death. But as his hunger for answers grew, so did his willingness to blur moral lines. Soon, rumors emerged that Elias had purchased corpses from nearby cemeteries. A gravedigger was caught selling bodies and confessed to dealings with a doctor in the hills. The case never went to trial. Elias, wealthy and well-connected, simply denied it all. But the whispers never stopped, and the Ashford children, those pale, watchful girls, were seen less and less outside the manor gates. What began as scientific curiosity was quickly spiraling into the occult. Elias Ashford was no longer trying to understand life. He was trying to conquer death. The Ashford twins, Isabella and Imogen, were born under a dark sky in the year 1812 during what the manor's midwife would later describe as a storm that howled like the dead. From the very beginning, there was something unsettling about the girls, identical in every way, save for a small crescent-shaped birthmark behind Imogen's left ear. Their eyes, a steely grey, seemed far too aware for infants. Elias Ashford referred to them not as daughters, but as the conduits. Their mother, Margaret Ashford, died mysteriously just weeks after their birth. The official cause was complications from childbirth, but locals speculated otherwise. Some claimed to have seen Elias roaming the manor grounds late at night, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth and mumbling in a tongue no one could identify. Margaret's funeral was closed casket, and even her own sister was not allowed to see the body. Afterward, the girls were rarely seen outside again. Within the manor, Elias dedicated himself to studying his daughters, meticulously documenting every aspect of their behavior. He noted their uncanny ability to move in perfect synchrony, speaking the same words at the same time, blinking in rhythm, even finishing each other's thoughts. Servants were forbidden from addressing the girls separately. "They are one soul in two vessels," Elias once wrote in his private ledger, which would later be discovered hidden behind a loose stone in the manor's wine cellar. By the age of 5, Isabella and Imogen had become ghost-like presences in Ashford Manor, never running, never laughing. They drifted from room to room, always holding hands, always watching. A tutor hired to instruct them in language and arithmetic lasted only 2 months before quitting in terror. He claimed the girls spoke to each other in a language unknown to him and once recited, in unison, a poem he had never taught them, one about to decay, fire, and becoming eternal through silence. More troubling were the deaths that followed them. A maid found drowned in the ornamental pond, her mouth filled with rose petals. A stable boy who broke his neck falling from the rafters, despite being an experienced climber. Each incident was ruled accidental, but whispers of the twins' involvement intensified. "They don't just look at you," said one surviving servant. "They look through you, like they already know how you'll die." Elias saw none of this as a problem. In fact, he saw it as confirmation. "The experiment has begun," he wrote. To him, the girls were not children. They were keys, living gateways to unlocking what he called the continuum. But others began to fear that Elias wasn't simply documenting the unknown, he was creating it. As the Ashford twins grew older, Ashford Manor began to empty. It didn't happen all at once. First, it was the stable hands and the gardeners, then the kitchen staff. One by one, the servants either quit without warning or vanished entirely, leaving behind no letters, no farewells, only silence. The few who remained refused to speak of the upper west wing, sealed shut with heavy iron locks and draped in red velvet curtains. That wing, they claimed, was not to be entered under any circumstances. According to old house ledgers, at least 17 employees either disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances between 1817 and 1824. A scullery maid named Elsie was last seen carrying a silver tray into the upper wing. Her apron was found later, stained with a thick black substance and folded neatly on her cot. A footman named Robert reportedly leapt from the bell tower after a single whispered conversation with Imogen Ashford. In his coat pocket, they found a single word carved into a piece of bone: below. Whispers of cult activity grew louder. Travelers passing through the nearby woods claimed to see flickering lights in the manor's upper windows at ungodly hours. Some swore they heard chanting, low, guttural sounds that made the air feel thick. And through it all, Elias Ashford remained silent. In public records, he offered no explanation, no apology. In his private journals, however, he called it cleansing the weak. The locked west wing became a symbol of dread. Once used for guest rooms and family gatherings, it was now a tomb of secrets. The heavy locks were engraved with alchemical symbols, some resembling ancient runes, others newer, more abstract. Strange sounds echoed from behind those doors. Knocking that didn't match any rhythm, a slow dragging across wooden floors, and sometimes the faint lullaby of a child, sung in reverse. One surviving servant, Margaret Rhett Linton, left a testimony in 1853, long after she had fled Ashford Manor. She described being awoken at midnight by the sound of dozens of bare feet running up the staircase, yet when she peered out, no one was there. The sound, she said, didn't match the number of people. It was like something was pretending to have feet. Then came the night of the storm. Several townsfolk saw firelight in the west wing. A loud crash was heard, followed by silence. For 3 days afterward, Elias did not leave his study. When he finally emerged, his beard was flecked with ash, and his eyes had changed. They were now as grey and glassy as his daughter's. After that, the remaining servants were dismissed, and no new ones were hired. Ashford Manor became a sealed world, populated only by Elias and the twins. Whatever was happening in the West Wing was no longer an experiment. It was a ritual. Among the few surviving artifacts of the Ashford estate, one item has caused more debate, fear and fascination than any other: the grimoire of Elias Ashford. This ancient-looking tome, bound in what appears to be tanned and weathered human skin, was recovered from the manor's hidden library decades after the Ashford line had vanished, and while scholars still argue over its authenticity, the contents within are chillingly specific: rituals, diagrams and incantations that reach far beyond mere superstition. The grimoire isn't just a book, it's a journal. Within its pages, Elias documented his descent into the occult. What began as the musings of a curious academic evolved into something far more disturbing. He wrote of mirrored dimensions and gateways beneath the soil, referencing ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, and pre-Christian Celtic sources. He described voices that spoke from beneath floorboards, promising eternal knowledge in exchange for ancestral offerings. Many of the rituals in the book are illegible, having been scorched or blotted out by ink and wax, but what remains readable is terrifying. There are entries detailing a mirror ritual that required twins, preferably identical, and the blood of a direct descendant. Another passage speaks of binding consciousnesses, wherein one soul is split between two bodies, allowing one to serve as a vessel, while the other becomes a gatekeeper. Several illustrations are scrawled into the margins: spirals with eyes in the center, skeletal twins holding hands across a sea of fire, a tree whose roots end in screaming faces. On one page, Elias wrote, "They are not daughters, but reflections, one made flesh, the other made void." Cryptographers who studied the book have claimed that embedded within the text is a cipher, a hidden code suggesting that Elias was not merely practicing forbidden rituals, but actively communicating with an external entity he referred to as the Other Herald. This entity, he believed, had chosen his bloodline for a higher purpose: the preservation and eventual awakening of a forgotten force buried beneath the Ashford grounds. The most infamous entry is dated the night before the fire that scorched the manor's west wing. "It is done. The alignment is near. Imogen is ready. Eliza still resists, but that will fade with time. I have seen the eye beneath the earth. I have tasted the light that unseams the soul. One last veil remains. When the clock chimes 13, the house will remember." After this entry, the handwriting changes, becoming erratic, sharp, and angular. Linguists have failed to translate most of the final pages, many of which appear to be written in no known language. Some suspect it's glossolalia, others fear it's something older, something deliberately forgotten. The grimoire now rests in the restricted vault of a private collection, unavailable to the public. But its legend continues to grow. Those who've handled it claim to dream in static and wake to the sound of children laughing behind locked doors. And so the question remains, was Elias Ashford insane, or was he recording the steps to a ritual that succeeded? If there's one motif that haunts every mention of the Ashford family's curse, it's the clock, the unseen clock, as it's come to be called. A massive, ornate timepiece once mounted on the wall of the Ashford estate's East Wing ballroom, the clock was unlike anything constructed during its era. It had no visible hands, no numbers, no pendulum. Instead, its face was smooth obsidian, and those who stood before it claimed to feel it ticking, not in sound, but in the back of their minds. The legend of the 13th hour begins with this strange device. The townspeople of Ash Hollow whispered that whenever tragedy struck the Ashford family, the clock would glow faintly with a deep crimson hue, just for a moment, before returning to its lifeless form. Yet, as generations passed and records vanished in fire or flood, the stories changed. Some said the clock didn't mark time, but folded it, opening a moment that existed between seconds. a forbidden hour not bound by earthly laws. What adds weight to these superstitions is a peculiar detail found in Elias Ashford's grimoire. He wrote about an hour outside the rotation of this world, an hour that exists only when the soul is aligned with its reflection. He called it the 13th hour, a moment when time breaks, the veil thins, and something else peers through. But here's where the story turns more chilling. In 1891, during a private gathering hosted by Elias for occult scholars and European aristocrats, something happened. The guests, about 20 in number, disappeared without a trace. The staff found the East Wing ballroom locked from the inside, the windows sealed, and no sign of the attendees. The only thing that remained was the clock, humming faintly with a red pulse like a heartbeat. The event was officially dismissed as a structural collapse followed by fire, but survivors, maids, groundskeepers, and a single errant told of strange screams muffled by laughter, the scent of sulphur, and a sudden silence that fell over the manor like a curtain. Several reportedly went mad in the months that followed. When the ruins of the East Wing were explored decades later, the unseen clock was gone, not broken, not dismantled, simply vanished. And yet, those who have visited the grounds since claim to hear a ticking when they step too close to where the ballroom once stood. Cameras malfunction, watches skip seconds, cell phones freeze. One visitor even reported seeing the number 13 appear on her digital clock at exactly 12:59 a.m., only to vanish a second later. Is the 13th hour real, or is it a psychological trick born of fear and legend? Regardless, those who study the Ashford curse tread carefully when the clock strikes midnight. Because in Ash Hollow, midnight may not be the end of the day. It might be the beginning of something else. If the Ashford lineage had ever shown signs of recovery or redemption, those hopes were extinguished with the birth and mysterious lives of Imogen and Eliza Ashford, the infamous Mirror sisters. Born in 1912 during a thunderstorm that reportedly cracked the manor's chapel bell in half, their arrival was marked by unease, not merely because they were identical twins, a rarity in the Ashford bloodline, but because of what was said about them by the nurses who delivered them. Only one cast a reflection. This curious claim, buried in a midwife's journal later recovered from a collapsed carriage house, is only the beginning of the unease surrounding the girls. Raised within the cold, looming halls of Ashford Manor, the sisters were isolated from other children, homeschooled by private tutors, and prohibited from leaving the estate. Visitors reported seeing them in the windows, one always smiling softly, the other scowling, yet they never seemed to stand in the same room at once. Servants whispered that the sisters never spoke aloud to each other, yet appeared to communicate with perfect understanding, often moving in eerie unison. Family records indicate that only one of the girls, Imogen, appeared in photographs, yet eyewitnesses swore both were always present. The most unsettling rumor came from a groundskeeper who claimed he caught one sister staring into an antique mirror for hours, murmuring in Latin, not a language taught in the household. He insisted the mirror began to ripple like water before the girl touched it, then vanished entirely. She was found in the library basement hours later, asleep beside a book on demonology. In 1928, both girls disappeared. Their final day on the estate is still a source of fevered debate. The butler, who later suffered a nervous breakdown, said he found one girl standing alone at the mansion's massive mirror, an artifact passed down from the 17th century. Her hand pressed flat against its surface. She turned and smiled, he reported, but the reflection did not move. Police investigations found no signs of forced entry or struggle. Only one slipper remained at the base of the mirror, and it was warm to the touch. To this day, Ashford Manor's grand mirror is rumored to be cursed. Paranormal investigators claim that if you stare into it long enough, you won't see your own reflection, but someone else's, often a girl, sometimes smiling, sometimes not. Imogen and Eliza, or at least their legacy, remain trapped between worlds, one foot in our reality, the other lost in whatever lies behind the glass. But the question lingers, were they ever truly two, or just one soul, fractured in reflection? By 1933, the Ashford legacy was a fractured tale of death, disappearance, and whispered madness. The manor stood more like a mausoleum than a home, its long hallways silenced, its candle sconces cold. Yet it was precisely this chilling reputation that attracted famed spiritualist Lady Evangeline Harrow, a controversial figure known for hosting séances in some of England's most haunted estates. She saw the Ashford Manor not as a cursed relic, but as an untapped well of spiritual potential. She believed the house itself was a portal, a doorway to the lost and the damned. Lady Harrow arrived on the eve of the summer solstice, accompanied by a skeptical historian, a psychic medium named Corbin Vell, and her apprentice, Alice Grafton. The séance was scheduled for midnight in the Ashford drawing room, a Gothic chamber lined with ancestral portraits, some of which had mysteriously refused to gather dust despite decades of neglect. A journal recovered from Lady Harrow's personal effects reveals the evening began in routine fashion. The circle formed, the candles lit, Latin chants spoken in low, deliberate rhythm. But within minutes, Corbin Vell began to convulse violently. His fingers clawed at the table, and he gasped a single word. Imogen. The room temperature dropped, and a roaring wind blew in despite the windows being shut tight. Lady Harrow pressed on, believing they were making contact. Alice Grafton would later describe a feeling of being pulled backward through time, like falling into cold water. She claimed she saw flashes, children crying, a woman burning, a man walking into a lake at night, smiling. Every flash, she said, ended with the same image, a shattered mirror reflecting no one. The climax came when the large mirror in the drawing room cracked violently, not from the outside, but as if something struck it from within. A dark mist oozed from its base, and Corbin began to speak in a voice not his own, higher, fractured, and unmistakably female. He repeated, "One soul, one body, one mirror," over and over, until he collapsed. The séance ended in chaos. Corbin would never speak again, admitted to a sanatorium 2 days later. Lady Harrow refused to conduct another séance for the rest of her life. Alice Grafton, the apprentice, went missing 1 year later while exploring abandoned train tunnels rumoured to lead beneath the Ashford estate. No séance has ever been attempted at the manor since, yet visitors claim the drawing room mirror still bears the crack from that night, like a frozen scream in glass. Some say if you stand before it at midnight on the solstice, you'll hear a whisper from the other side. "You called us, we came." And they're still waiting. In the dark lineage of the Ashford family, few names stir more unease than that of Thomas Ashford, known among occult historians as the Silent Warlock. Born in 1781, Thomas was an enigmatic figure, educated at Oxford but expelled for conducting blasphemous chemical rituals beneath the chapel. Unlike his forebears who leaned toward madness or cruelty, Thomas was something far stranger, cold, calculating, and obsessively inquisitive about life after death. Historical documents describe Thomas as a man who rarely spoke, hence the moniker, but what he lacked in speech he made up for in action. His obsession with necromancy, alchemy, and early forms of what we now call bioengineering bordered on the insane. He inherited Ashford Manor in 1802 and promptly walled off the eastern wing, transforming it into his personal laboratory. Over the next 30 years, servants were dismissed, guests were denied entry, and Thomas Ashford was rarely seen in daylight. The only consistent sound from that wing was a rhythmic series of thumps and hums described by a local constable as metallic breathing. Curious neighbors and distant relatives who tried to investigate often reported strange smells, ozone, sulfur, and something foul like rotting meat emanating from the manor. Livestock near the estate began to die inexplicably. Some were found mutilated but untouched by predators. Strange circular burn marks like sigils appeared in nearby woods. Local children began to whisper that the man in the walls could speak through the trees. In 1836, a fire broke out in the eastern wing. By the time villagers rushed in to help, they found the manor eerily quiet. No sign of fire damage, no smoke, just silence. Thomas Ashford was never seen again. But in the hidden cellars, they discovered dozens of preserved notebooks bound in human skin, filled with illustrations of bizarre hybrid creatures, part man, part animal, some with multiple hearts, others with no visible orifices. Most disturbing of all were entries labeled echo shells, mechanical vessels Thomas allegedly constructed to trap human souls and reuse them. One of these devices was later examined in secret by the Royal Society before mysteriously vanishing from its vaults in 1852. To this day, its whereabouts are unknown. Rumors persist that Thomas succeeded in transferring consciousness into a mechanical form, that he might still be alive somewhere within the manor's hidden walls. Paranormal investigators have picked up unexplained electromagnetic anomalies in the abandoned East Wing. Some swear they hear faint metallic whispers echoing through the old pipes at night, muttering in a voice no longer human. Was Thomas Ashford truly mad, or did he unlock a forbidden knowledge we were never meant to touch? The truth may still breathe, in silence. Of all the tragic and bewildering events associated with the Ashford family, none has baffled historians, investigators, or paranormal scholars more than the disappearance of Margaret Ashford in the winter of 1893. She was only 17 when she vanished, and yet her story is perhaps the most haunting of them all, not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. Margaret was the youngest daughter of Alfred and Eleanor Ashford, both of whom were known for their eccentric but relatively quiet existence on the estate during the late Victorian era. Margaret, however, was different from her kin. Described by her governess as gentle, brilliant, and oddly aware of things she should not know, Margaret had a strange knack for predicting events before they occurred. On several occasions she warned visitors of impending storms, accidents, even a fire that destroyed a neighboring village barn, each of which came true with eerie precision. She would spend long hours staring into mirrors, scribbling in languages no one taught her, and often complained that she was being watched through time. Her diary, later found in the attic of the Ashford Library, contains cryptic entries such as, "The clocks do not tick for me anymore. I saw myself in the reflection but older and afraid." On the night of December the 21st, 1893, the longest night of the year, Margaret was last seen entering the North Tower of Ashford Manor. According to the only witness, a maid named Lily Summers, Margaret wore a white nightgown and was barefoot despite the snow outside. When questioned, Lily stated that Margaret said she needed to fix the folds of time before they cut her again. Margaret never returned. A massive search followed. The entire estate was scoured, including underground tunnels, wells, and even sealed-off rooms. Not a single trace of her was found. No footprints in the snow, no evidence of foul play. Her disappearance was so complete that even the dogs brought in to trace her scent would whimper and cower near the North Tower, refusing to enter. What makes Margaret's vanishing more sinister are the accounts that followed in the decades after. Several visitors claimed to see her standing in the upper tower window, decades after she vanished, looking no older than 17, her face pale and eyes wide, as if forever frozen in the moment of her disappearance. Paranormal investigators recorded significant electromagnetic disturbances near the tower and captured unexplained whispers on tape, one clearly saying, "The folds are still wrong." To this day, Margaret Ashford is spoken of as a ghost trapped not between life and death, but between moments in time itself. Did she wander through a dimensional rift? Was she a victim of one of Thomas Ashford's failed experiments resurrected years later? Or did the house itself, long sentient and malevolent, absorb her into its growing hunger? Whatever the answer, the North Tower remains sealed by law and by fear. In the vast attic of Ashford Manor, buried beneath sheets of moth-eaten linen and forgotten trunks, lay a peculiar item that has since become one of the most feared relics in Macabre history, a porcelain doll known as Eloise. To the unknowing eye, it may appear as just another Victorian keepsake with delicate blue glass eyes and golden curls. But to those who've dared to study the Ashford legacy in earnest, Eloise is far more than a child's plaything. She is, according to local legend, a vessel of torment, one that has outlived generations of the Ashford bloodline. The doll was first gifted to Margaret Ashford, yes, the same girl who mysteriously vanished in 1893 on her 12th birthday. It was said to have been imported from Austria and arrived at the manor unrequested, wrapped in old parchment with a note that simply read, "She listens when no one else will." At first, Margaret adored the doll. She carried it everywhere, whispered to it, and even began dressing it in custom-made Ashford family garments. But by the end of that year, her temperament had changed drastically. Servants reported hearing her scream at Eloise during the night, accusing it of showing her the wrong deaths and laughing at the wrong time. The most chilling transformation came when Margaret began speaking in what linguists later identified as Middle High German, a language she had never been taught. According to entries in Eleanor Ashford's private diary, Margaret often fell into catatonic trances while holding Eloise, her eyes rolled back and her mouth mumbling what sounded like prayers or warnings. After Margaret's disappearance, the doll was stored away, but misfortunes followed its trail wherever it resurfaced. In 1911, Emily Ashford, a distant cousin visiting the estate, found the doll in the attic and brought it down to the nursery. Within a week, her younger brother Philip had died. But after falling down the main staircase, Emily claimed Eloise pushed him. No one believed her until she too was found dead 3 nights later, having apparently suffocated in her sleep. Her hands were wrapped around the doll so tightly that it took hours to pry them free. What solidified the doll's sinister reputation was a chilling discovery in 1952, when a restoration team opened the doll's porcelain body cavity during a preservation effort. Inside, they found a small, yellowed tooth, human and determined to belong to a girl approximately 12 years old. Further DNA analysis later suggested it was from Margaret herself. The doll now rests in a glass case, locked deep within the Ashford Estate's private museum, barred from public view. According to the caretaker, the glass fogs up on rainy nights, and once every year, on the night of Margaret's birthday, he swears he hears someone tapping from the inside. Was Eloise merely a conduit for Margaret's growing madness, or was the doll a cursed relic long before it arrived at Ashford Manor? Either way, the question remains, who sent the doll, and why? The Ashford family library was a marvel of its time. Towering shelves of ancient tomes, secret first editions, and leather-bound journals stretching from floor to ceiling. But beyond the books, beyond the fireplace with its soot-darkened marble, there existed something few dared to speak of. A hidden room known only through hushed rumors and the cryptic entries of the Ashford journals. This room, obscured for decades behind a false bookcase, would come to be known as the Chamber of Whispers, a claustrophobic, candlelit vault said to house unspeakable truths and echo with voices not of the living. It was Eleanor Ashford, the matriarch with a reputation for dabbling in mysticism, who first designed the secret chamber in 1861. She had it constructed without the knowledge of her husband, under the guise of structural reinforcement. In reality, she sought a sanctum where she could engage in spiritualist rituals, removed from the scrutiny of society and even her own family. Behind the movable shelf in the west wing of the library, disguised as a row of medical texts, was a narrow spiraling passage carved into the manor's stone foundation. The room was small, barely wide enough for 3 people to stand. Inside were symbols etched into the walls, many matching those seen in occult texts dating back to the 15th century. At the center was a 3-legged wooden table with melted candle stubs, and on the floor, a worn leather mat arranged in a circle of ashes. Diaries recovered from Eleanor's estate tell of seances held during the witching hour, often in the company of other aristocratic women from nearby manors, all seeking to converse with the veil between death and dreaming. After Eleanor's death, the room remained concealed for nearly a century. It wasn't rediscovered until 1974, when a group of university researchers was granted limited access to the Ashford archives. On entering the library, one student noticed an unnatural breeze flowing from behind the shelves. With some effort, the false bookcase gave way, revealing the long-forgotten chamber. Untouched by time, its candles still standing, as though they had been extinguished mere moments earlier. What followed was a cascade of strange phenomena. The team recorded low, indecipherable murmurs that only appeared on playback tapes. One student, Harold Denton, became convinced he had seen a silhouette crouched in the corner of the room, a silhouette that was gone upon second glance. He left the estate the next day and never returned to academia. Perhaps most disturbing were the books stored in the hidden room, handwritten volumes bound in what appeared to be human skin, containing spells, hexes, and vivid descriptions of rituals performed under blood moons. Some pages were blank until exposed to candlelight, revealing text written in a language no scholar has since identified. Today, the room is sealed again, per the Ashford Trust's orders. Some say the whispers never stopped. They merely wait for someone foolish enough to listen. It was a chilling winter night in 1883 when flames erupted from the west wing of the Ashford estate. Locals from the surrounding village of Braxton Hill gathered at the gates, watching helplessly as the sky glowed orange and smoke twisted into unnatural shapes. The fire appeared to rage for hours. Windows burst, timber cracked, and flames roared as though fed by something more than wood and air. Yet when the fire brigade arrived the following morning, what they found was not a smouldering ruin, but something far stranger, a wing untouched, preserved as though no fire had ever occurred, except for a thick layer of warm, breathing ash covering every surface. This event, now referred to as the fire that didn't burn, is perhaps the most baffling chapter in the Ashford legacy. According to multiple eyewitness accounts, flames had engulfed the structure from top to bottom. One gardener, Thomas Welling, swore he saw a figure dancing inside the fire, arms raised to the ceiling, laughing. Yet no trace of burns, scorch marks, or structural damage could be found. Only that thick, grey ash, strangely undisturbed by wind or movement, as though it had settled with intention. Even more disturbing was the temperature of the ash. Though the building was icy from the winter night, the ash itself radiated a consistent warmth and in some places appeared to pulse softly, like a living organism inhaling and exhaling. Several house staff reported that when standing near the ash for too long they could hear soft whispers, as though voices were being funneled through the dust. A maid named Ruth Eleanor suffered a sudden seizure near the old grand piano covered in ash, and later claimed she saw 1,000 eyes staring from beneath the soot. Curiously, no official investigation was ever completed. The fire chief's report, once filed with local authorities, vanished from records within a week. The only remaining evidence came from a few handwritten letters by local constables, all of which described the event with barely concealed horror. One note read, "This was no natural fire. The house defied destruction. It was as though the flames were feeding not on timber, but on time itself." Scholars who examined the site years later suggested the fire could have been a phantom burn, a paranormal phenomenon where fire appears in the material world but leaves no physical damage, an idea scoffed at by mainstream science, yet persistently linked to places with dark spiritual resonance, and the Ashford estate had more than its share of that. The ashes remained for decades. Even after numerous attempts at cleaning, they returned, blanketing the same areas night after night, as if reclaiming their territory. In recent years, the ashes have reportedly begun shifting on their own, spelling symbols familiar only to those versed in ancient occult scripts. To this day, no one sleeps in the West Wing. Those who do report vivid dreams of burning alive, yet waking without even a scorch. Only the ash remains, and it still breathes. In the dimly lit parlour room of the Ashford estate hangs a portrait unlike any other in the manor. Officially titled Lady Eleanor at Dusk, the painting appears at first glance to be a traditional 18th century oil portrait, a seated woman in a crimson gown, her dark hair pinned with pearls, a subtle smirk resting on her lips. But this canvas harbours a far darker secret, one whispered through generations. It was painted not with oil, but with human blood. The artist behind the piece was Ignatius Leclerc, a troubled French painter known for his morbid fixation on immortality through art. Invited by the Ashfords in 1767, Leclerc was commissioned to capture Lady Eleanor Ashford's likeness, a task that took him an unprecedented 9 months to complete. Servants who observed the sessions noted strange behaviours. Leclerc would murmur in Latin as he painted, often slicing his own fingers and bleeding onto the brush, claiming, "The pigment must remember the soul." One footman claimed to have seen Eleanor weep during a sitting, only for her tears to vanish mid-air before they touched her cheek. When the painting was finally unveiled, guests recoiled. Though beautiful, there was something deeply unsettling about Eleanor's eyes. They followed viewers as they moved through the room, not metaphorically, but literally. Over the decades, countless witnesses have sworn that the eyes blink, dilate, and even shift expression depending on who is looking. More than a dozen documented accounts claim the portrait smiles wider when someone enters the room alone. But the most terrifying legends surround those who tried to remove or destroy it. In 1823, a fire inspector named William Croft attempted to take the painting down for safety reasons. As he touched the frame, his hand blistered instantly, as if it had touched hot metal. He later died of infection. In 1891, a distant Ashford Orphanage ordered it removed and burned. The fire pit was set, the canvas thrown in, yet the next morning the painting was found hanging back in its original place, untouched, though Lady Eleanor's smile was noticeably broader, her dress now streaked with faint red veins. The legend took a more sinister turn in 1978 when paranormal investigators recorded hours of video footage inside the room. On the third night, the camera captured Eleanor's head turning ever so slightly as a researcher slept on the couch. Moments later, a voice was heard on the audio. "Why do you stare when I have always watched?" Today, the blood portrait is kept behind velvet ropes. Visitors are warned not to photograph it as cameras malfunction, batteries drain, and footage often appears scrambled or entirely black. Some say Eleanor's soul was trapped in the painting either willingly or as punishment. Others claim it's not Eleanor at all, but something far older, wearing her face. Either way, if you visit the Ashford estate and feel your spine tingle in the parlor room, do not look up, because she already sees you. Hidden behind a velvet curtain at the end of the West Wing's third floor lies a door unlike any other in the Ashford estate. Known simply as the final room, this entrance is sealed with 3 iron locks, each etched with runes from different cultures, Latin, Hebrew, and an unidentifiable script some researchers have connected to pre-Canaanite demonology. No key has ever been found. No one alive claims to have seen what lies beyond it. And yet, for over a century, the door has remained warm to the touch, pulsing faintly, as if it were breathing. Local folklore claims the door leads to the root of the Ashford curse, a place where time fractures, where those who enter may never return, or worse, return changed. Some even speculate it was never part of the original blueprint. According to the estate's earliest architectural records, dated 1721, there was no room behind that wall, and yet, by 1792, the door is plainly referenced in a renovation ledger as the sealed threshold. In 1849, a curious and defiant heir, Catherine Ashford, reportedly became obsessed with the door. Journals recovered from her quarters detail vivid dreams she had. Dreams of a screaming child, bound in chains of fire, begging to be freed. Catherine claimed the door would knock back when she pressed her ear against it. One night, she stole 2 of the 3 keys from the estate vault. She was never seen again. A decade later, her brother, Richard Ashford, began hearing whispers outside the door each night. Voices pleading for release, some speaking in tongues. Fearing the return of his sister or something wearing her face, Richard had the final lock forged from silver recovered from a cathedral cross, blessed by a priest flown in under strict secrecy. Even now, visitors who wander too close report a dizzying nausea, a sudden spike in blood pressure, or the sensation of their teeth vibrated. Nangto, one caretaker in the 1970s, suffered a stroke after fainting outside the sealed door. When paramedics arrived, they found him clutching his ears, muttering, "It's hungry, and it knows my name." More disturbing are the recordings made by paranormal investigators. On more than one occasion, audio has captured childlike laughter emanating from the other side. In one chilling instance, the voice said clearly, "One lock remains. You brought the final key." Some believe the room is a dimensional breach, where the sins of the Ashford family were sealed away. Others think it holds a relic, or perhaps a living being, never meant to be known. But one truth remains: the door has never opened, and it must not open. Because if it ever does, whatever lies beyond is not coming out. It's already here, and it's waiting for you to let it in.